So just that level of being comfortable with the text you're reading lends itself to speed, which I would maybe argue a lot of the reason pastors don't want to stay in the languages is because it's burdensome. But if you can learn these undergirding morphological principles that remove that burden, then diving into the language is no longer a burden. It can be enjoyable.
Frank Hartman here, Biblical Mastery Academy. And I have a special treat today. I have the opportunity to speak with Dr. Adam Howell of Boyce College at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. We're going to be talking a lot today about different Hebrew topics and an upcoming conference that's available. And so I just invite you to sit back, enjoy this conversation, and I hope you find it to be very helpful today and perhaps even answer some questions that you've had. So let me first just start by saying welcome, Dr. Howell.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure to
Glad to
have
be
you.
here. Very thankful.
If you're not familiar with who Dr. Adam Howell is, let me give you a brief intro. As I said, he is the professor of Old Testament interpretation at Boyce College at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. I kind of pronounced that right, didn't I?
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah. Um, he's also the author of several books specifically written to help students learn Hebrew better. And a number of those, I'll just show you. I happen to, this is going to sound like a fanboy moment because I happen to own these, but I just want to let you know what they look like in case you're interested in getting them as well. Uh, he's written illustrated First Kings in Hebrew, which is a really wonderful way to read First Kings with all the illustrations, the action. It's like a comic book, sort of, right? Uh, Very nice. It's in Hebrew. The dialogue is in Hebrew, but you get the English translation at the bottom for if you're still learning Hebrew and you need to refer to that, like a reader's edition. And then there's a similar volume with Ruth, an illustrated Hebrew reader's edition. Again, a great way to read Ruth. This one was particularly special for you, wasn't it, Dr. Howell?
It was, yeah. So yeah, that one. My dad taught visual arts in public schools for 35 years. He's retired now, of course, but he did the illustrations for that one. So that was one that Dad and I were able to work on together. And so yeah, that was a fun project.
Yeah, great. And just in case you didn't get a clue from that Dr. Howell likes Ruth, last year he came out with this really great book. I use this in teaching my intermediate Hebrew class where we go through Ruth and read it through its entirety in Hebrew. And this is Ruth, a guide to reading biblical Hebrew. So this isn't just Ruth with the biblical Hebrew. It's got a lot of good information about the exegetical elements of the book of Ruth, telling you what's going on with the Hebrew, what the forms are, why they're doing what they're doing. Anything else you want to say on that? I just have found this to be so helpful.
No, I think that's about it. I was very thankful to Lexham Press for allowing me to write that one. I'm hopeful that there'll be some more volumes in that series. I know they're having discussions about that right now with someone to take on that series. So we kind of Dr. Plummer and I, who's Dr. Plummer's with Daily Dose of Greek, we talk about volumes like this as kind of being an exegesis course in a book. And so, in that one, I'm trying to think through what are the things that a first year student would still be struggling with that we can reinforce over and over again. And then what are some things that a second year student could advance with as far as grammar and syntax. So it's a little bit of both of those worlds. I think it captures a pretty big spectrum of Hebrew students. So
Great. And then, of course, we can't leave out Hebrew for life, right? The namesake. There's also Greek for life, but we'll let somebody else do the video and interview on that one, right? But Hebrew for life, the namesake of the conference that's coming up, and we'll talk more about that later in this interview. But those are just some of the works that I think are very, very helpful for the beginning biblical Hebrew learner. Maybe, Dr. Howell, you can share with us how you came to first have perhaps an interest in biblical Hebrew, and then what was your method of learning?
yeah, good. So my My journey toward Hebrew was largely a product of just doing the next right thing. I don't have this big, there never was this big aha moment. I want to work in Semitic languages or anything like that. I was just simply working through my MDiv curriculum and got to the point that I needed to take Hebrew. And I came to Southern Seminary to study with Bruce Ware. So I wanted to teach systematic theology. So that was my initial goal. So that's why I came to Southern Seminary. And then again, just in the curriculum of my MDiv, I took Hebrew. And that was where it was kind of like, wow, I love doing this. I love the way the language is lyrical, so to speak. A lot of idioms, a lot of figures of speech that really paint word pictures. I just I love that. I don't know what it is about it, but I love that. Um, I enjoyed Greek as well from just a linguistics perspective. I did my undergraduate degree in microbiology and chemistry, but I think if I knew then what I learned in seminary, I probably would have done a linguistics undergraduate degree. Just find linguistics to be very fascinating. So when I took Hebrew, learned to love the language itself, and then also kind of realizing through that process that I enjoy linguistics. It was kind of like it was a pretty easy shift from systematics to Hebrew language. I studied with Russell Fuller. My professor at seminary was T.J. Betts, but he used Russell Fuller and Kyung-Won Choi's grammar from Kriegel, Invitation to Biblical Hebrew syntax, or sorry, Invitation to Biblical Hebrew. They've got a second volume on syntax, but that was the method that I learned. Heavy morphology approach, so you'll hear that in the Ruth Guide as well, and probably in a lot of the stuff that I do with Daily Dose. Um, as you're translating, you've got, of course, the distinction between form and meaning. But if you don't know what the forms are, then the meaning is irrelevant. So, I have a heavy morphology approach on why is there a yod there? Why do I want to see a yod there and there's not one? Why did that patach change to a kametz? These are the kinds of things that I was interested in. So that was how I studied, and then Dr. Fuller was my supervisor for my PhD as well. So very thankful for his help and influence in my development.
Yeah, very good. I've appreciated Dr. Fuller's grammar and syntax book as well. Very very helpful.
Yeah,
Um, I didn't mean to leave out that you are also of course, the host of Daily Dose of Hebrew, and again, that's another resource that is so helpful for those who are learning Hebrew. Gives them an opportunity to practice and to encounter those kinds of things that you just talked about in actual text, to see uh, uh, these morphological phenomenon in action.
yeah.
So, are there, when you were learning Hebrew, were there particularly difficult aspects of Hebrew that you just that took a while to stick? I find with my students, uh, you never know what their difficult area is going to be, the one that they need to dedicate extra time to. Uh, did you have something like that as you were learning?
That's a good question. I bet if you ask TJ Betts, he would tell you there's several places that I struggled. After I took uh, the way that Dr. Fuller's grammar was set up and the way we used it in class, it was very uh, you focused on one thing for that week and then you moved on, and it all built certainly, but there was an ability to kind of compartmentalize the segments so that they were manageable. And so in any given segment, I don't remember there being something that was just like, I can't get this. But then after I took Hebrew with Dr. Betts for a whole year, he invited us back to come to the classes for the following year and just help. One of the things that he does, he calls it board work, where he gets students paired together on a whiteboard and just works through examples together so that they can kind of be teaching one another. And he allowed us to come back and just be around the classroom helping as the students have questions. And that was where I kind of realized areas that were challenging for me, but they were It was like one that I remember particularly are O class Seglet nouns.
Mhm.
And we were trying to we were trying to pay attention to like when does it get a meth egg and when does it not? When does the so like Noam, when does the expected silent schwa flip to a composite O vowel? And these were the things we were talking about. So I think the things that gave me the most trouble were probably a bit meticulous for a normal like, I think a normal Hebrew student wouldn't really care much about those things, but that was the stuff we were focused on. Um, and then just the volume of those morphological changes. You get those changes in verbs, you get those changes in nouns, you get those changes with pronominal suffixes, and those things, just the volume of it, I think was a bit challenging for me. But I tell my students now that I kind of have to partly apologize that I don't remember a lot of what was going on in my mind back then, because a lot of that has been so solidified over the years. um, so yeah, I can't remember anything specific that I wrestled with a ton, but I know there were things I just can't.
Sure. So now we may have folks watching today, pastors, teachers in their local church, who say, that's fine. All of this technical language, linguistic language, morphological language, that's fine if you want to teach it at a seminary level, that kind of thing. But what about the pastor or the teacher at the local church? Do they have a need to kind of get to this level of proficiency in a biblical language, or particularly Hebrew?
Yeah, yeah, good. That's good. I go back and forth on this one because in my heart I want to say yes, because these are the parts of the language that I know and love. Um, I do think there is something to say. You've got to. In my mind, I'm kind of splicing out the difference between a pastor who is excited about learning the languages and wants to keep moving forward in his Hebrew journey. That guy is going to be different than the pastor who is kind of like, oh, the languages are irrelevant. It's going to be hard to convince that guy that even learning vocab is helpful. But for the guy who's like really engaged and I want to keep this up, I want to keep moving forward, I would argue that those deep morphological things are helpful, um, simply because it's going to give you speed with translation as you're working through a passage. If you have all of those morphological principles in mind, then you're not wrestling with a particular weak verb of even knowing what it is. You just kind of go, that's a hifil, and the one vav has contracted to a holem vav. Like, I'm good with that. So just that level of being comfortable with the text you're reading lends itself to speed, which I would maybe argue a lot of the reason pastors don't want to stay in the languages is because it's burdensome. But if you can learn these undergirding morphological principles that remove that burden, then diving into the language is no longer a burden. It can be enjoyable. So yeah, for the guy who's invested and really wants to stay in, I would say it's worth it. So
Now, I think we would agree that as believers, it's incumbent upon us to always grow in our spiritual depth, in our knowledge of God's word, and which we in turn would then deepen our relationship with Christ and help us to apply His word to our life so much better. If we can get to a closer, more, let's say, more accurate level of God's word, i.e., moving away from a translation dependency to the original languages, would that be helpful to the laity, the person in the pew who they don't necessarily teach in their church, they're not a pastor, but they're looking for a way to be able to grow deeper in the word? Would learning the biblical languages be something that would help them accomplish that goal?
yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think that as we consider like a doctrine of inspiration of Scripture, right? We understand the Scriptures to be inspired in the original autographs, and we believe that the texts we have today of the Greek and Hebrew are accurate representations of those original autographs. And so that doesn't mean that we would dismiss the doctrine of inspiration with an English translation. but if we can get closer to that original language, then I think we are. It doesn't unlock this interpretive key, but it does give richness and flavor to the scriptures that we know and love. And so, yeah, I am always impressed and shocked by the number of lay folks that come to the Hebrew Review class and the conference. I mean, we end up with medical doctors, engineers, construction workers, homeschool moms who they want to know and love God's word, and they're doing that by diving into the original languages. So I absolutely think it would be helpful. Now, the other side of that coin with the caveat is I don't believe that you have to know the original languages in order to have a rich and fulfilling relationship with God and understanding His Word rightly. So, as a Hebrew guy, I want to say you need to learn Hebrew, but I do want to make it clear that I don't think that it's required to have a vibrant relationship with the Lord. So,
Yeah. I can't remember who from whom I first heard this, so I can't attribute it effectively. But uh, the uh, it bounces around in my head sometimes that it's not important for everyone in your local church to know Hebrew or Greek, but it is important for at least one person in your church to know
yeah,
Hebrew or Greek. Of course, in the past, that was generally the pastor because they'd gone to seminary and biblical languages were always a requirement in all seminary programs throughout the country, if you would. That seems to be dropping off over
yeah.
time. um, how, how do you react as a professor at a seminary level at Boyce College there, and you see this trend of the biblical languages sort of fading away from academia and the future training of pastors throughout the country? Are you concerned?
Yeah, yeah, and I don't. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think that I trust the Lord to preserve His church and all of the richness that the languages can bring to that. But it does seem to be waning a bit in academia, which is the place where I hope that our pastors are training. To serve the church well and to serve the people well. So yeah, concern is probably the right word, but not despairing. There are a lot of schools that have very vibrant language programs. I was just recently in Israel with a group from Gordon Conwell, and one of the things that they do, and I think RTS does this as well, is that they have their language classes very early on in their programs, and then the expectation is you go to a class on Amos, the expectation is you're in the original languages at the master's level, right? Not that's always the expectation at the doctoral level, but there are some schools that very much have that emphasis on the languages, and so not despairing, but certainly concerning that we are putting more stock in software programs for the sake of a pragmatic result, um, versus actually diving into the languages and knowing them and learning them. Um, I could probably suss out what I mean by some of that if it's
Yeah.
unclear, but
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and build on that? I mean, if you're talking about should I learn tools or should I learn the language, how should a
yeah,
potential a viewer here today is saying, well, I don't know if I should just go with a tools course or something. There's books out there that are that are focused just on learning enough of the tools so that
yeah,
maybe I'll say don't hurt yourself kind of thing. And
yeah,
then
yeah,
there's other ones that are going to demand the language just like if you were going to learn German or French or something.
yeah.
What are you, in your opinion, what are some of the pros and cons of that for the student?
Yeah, so I think that the knowing the language is always going to be better, and then letting the tools fuel the research in the language. Like one of the things that the tools are incredible at doing. I've got an article on this. It's in Didaktikas, the journal. I don't remember the title of it, but it's something like graded implementation was my approach. of like there are certain levels where you can introduce the tools to do certain things that aid the language learning rather than the tool being the language learning. And so that would be my argument for the use of the tools. I absolutely think they're helpful. I love Logos and Accordance. I love those things, but it's because they help me do really in-depth and intricate searches, grammatical searches to see, okay, right here in Deuteronomy, I see this construction. Where else do I see that so that I can learn what is it communicating? Right? That those are how you want the I would argue how you want the tools to help you. Um, not to be a scroll over function for a student to just pass an exam, but scroll over, if you familiar with these things, scroll over the word and it'll drop down the information.
Yes.
That's what I mean by kind of a pragmatic result. If all we're going for with the original languages is to pass an MDiv course, then fine. The tools can help you do that. But what I would want to argue for is actually knowing the language, and then letting those tools deepen your exegesis and ability to do interpretation.
Would you agree then that also just learning the tools, just so you can do a word study or drop a Greek or Hebrew word in the middle of your sermon or something, and which I've heard pastors do, the misuse words, that kind of thing. It happens. But relying on just the tools actually doesn't help exegesis. It probably will mislead your exegesis because you don't know the bigger context of
Yeah,
the
that's
language
right.
and how it's
Yeah.
used.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't think that is not a fault of the tools. Again, I'm very favorable to the tools. I mean, there's incredible things that they can do. Um, but that would be the fault of the user. That would be the attitude that comes into the language of let me just check this box in my MDiv curriculum, or let me just get through this so that I can move on with my life. um, those kinds of attitudes, I think, approaching the languages would be what leads the tools to being problematic, right? I'm thinking here of like it's on the Greek side of things, but D.A. Carson's exegetical fallacies of the Greek New Testament. The tools can help you do exegetical fallacies
Yes.
if you don't know the language. Um, and then one of the things that Dr. Plummer and I have talked about before is like knowing the language as aiding your ability to sniff out or to recognize heretical arguments. A tool is not going to help you do that. A tool is simply going to, a digital tool is simply going to tell you, here's what the word means. But you're reading a commentary that's laying out some sort of elaborate argument that actually, in some places, could be heretical. If you can't follow their argument in the language itself because all you know is what the word is from your tool, then you might be inclined to follow that heretical argument. And so I think there's so many ways that actually knowing the language helps versus just simply using the digital tools as a crutch. But I would say still let the digital tools deepen your exegesis and deepen your interpretive ability after learning the language.
Yeah. So, as one is learning the language, or maybe they've completed a first year of Hebrew in some manner or form, they've got a basic vocabulary, they've got the basic mechanics of the language down. Still a lot of fog, though, as far as, and I'm just using that Bill Mounce's term, right?
Yep.
That there's a lot of fog. Not everything's perfectly clear even after you learn a first year of Hebrew. Uh, how do your published works then, your book on First Kings, your book on Ruth, the illustrated version of Ruth, how can a user implement those as a way to then build upon that, what they've learned in their first year, and maybe uh, push some of that fog away?
Yeah, good. I There's a chapter in Hebrew for Life. I think it's titled "Read, Read, Read," and the entire chapter is has different strategies for reading every day. And so I would argue, and I actually just sent an email to a student from the spring semester who was asking me a very similar question: how do I keep going? Um, and my answer to that question is always read a little bit every day in the original language. Um, and so those resources, as I'm kind of thinking of what to put into the market that could help students, I'm trying to think of different ways to aid reading. So the illustrated editions are going to aid the reading. The King's volume has the translation at the bottom, full English translation, so you can kind of bounce back and forth and make sure you're going along correctly in the Hebrew text. The pictures that kind of tell the storyboard, you're kind of seeing the words happen with those pictures. So all of those are just trying to be creative with thinking of ways to help students read every day. The illustrated editions, the Ruthven and the Kings, are probably more at like an entry level. So you've just finished your first year. What next? Well, let's pick up one of these illustrated editions and be reading through. I've got some vocab help, et cetera, et cetera. But largely, I can make my way through. The Ruth Guide is probably more of like a next level reading, but still read two or three verses and then jump into the Ruth Guide and see kind of what does that mean? How does that work itself out? So that's what I'm trying to think of, is just students to be reading a little bit every day. Daily Dose of Hebrew helps with that. The 2 minute videos, 2 to 3 minute videos, and you've done something every single day. I think little bits of consistency every day are going to outweigh chunks of time uh, every day. And so that's how I hope those resources can help.
Yeah, that's I agree. We have kind of uh, put forth that mantra as well at Biblical Mastery Academy for a long time. It's that
Mhm.
little small consistent steps is the way we've phrased that. And we have found that as well to be so much more effective in our students than trying to drink from a fire hose.
Yeah,
That's not going to work. Languages
yeah,
just don't work that way.
that's
So
right. And I think you could even compare that model to like, you can compare that model to like learning a modern language. Like, think if you wanted to learn modern Hebrew, it's not going to help you to go to Israel for a week at a time every other year. But if you're there regularly and you live there, then what we're kind of arguing for as little bit every day with reading your Hebrew Bible would be little bit all day every day if you live in Israel. But that's how you're going to learn the language. You're going to encounter, hey, I saw this thing just yesterday when I was in the market, and now I know how to say it. So let's say over the course of a week, you're in Deuteronomy 12:1 on Monday, and by Friday, you're in 12:5, and you've encountered another word that you saw on Monday again, and now you know how to translate it. Those are the same concepts, I think. It's just in learning a modern language in that context, it's sped up dramatically. But you just have to encounter those things over and over again, and the way to do it is to read.
yeah. And one thing I guess I'll also point out is you can't beat the price of Daily Dose of Hebrew or Daily Dose of Greek.
Yeah, that's right. It's free
It's
99.
free 99. Is that
Free
what you
99. That's
free
right.
99? Yeah, I haven't heard that one before. Good. Yeah. Maybe you can't afford the books and things, but getting a daily dose of 2 to 3 minutes of language learning for absolutely free, that you can't beat that, right? So
Yeah.
that's great. Thank you for you and the others who contribute of their time to
Yeah.
provide that for no cost. Just want to take a moment to thank you for that.
Yeah. Sure thing.
We mentioned the Hebrew for Life, Greek for Life conference, and I'm intentionally ordering it in that way. I'm exposing my bias here to Hebrew, but uh, it's the Hebrew for Life, Greek for Life conference. This is, if I'm correct, this is the third time the conference is offered. It's
Yep.
been every other year for the last few years. And just for context, I did have the privilege of attending at the last one 2 years ago, as well as your review course. But at the conference itself, it's a 2 day conference. on a Friday afternoon and a Saturday in Louisville, Kentucky, there at the campus of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. What are some of the topics that a potential attendee can look forward to attending, right? Talks or topics?
Yeah, good. So we have this year we've kind of expanded it out a little bit. I think we've moved from 3 plenary sessions to 5 now. One of those will be a panel discussion. So, we'll all be in the room together, but it's not like a talk. So we've got some different things going on there. I'll be giving a session on the law of the harvest. So just kind of thinking of the long game as it relates to language learning, not the immediate. Dr. Plummer has a session on something. I don't remember it. The plenaries, Tyler Flatt will be giving a plenary session on Latin. So kind of, how that works its way in. So we've beefed up the plenary sessions a little bit, and then a variety of breakout sessions, anywhere from on the Hebrew side. I'll speak to that on anywhere from looking at the it's called jots and tittles, but it's basically just the basics. So, so if somebody just wants to see noun morphology and verb morphology, we've got breakouts on that, all the way to like discourse grammar stuff that Bible Arc will be coming to do. And so we've got a variety of things along that spectrum to match probably where anybody would be in language learning. And one of the things that I love about the conference, people ask us regularly, like, who is this for? And because of that range of academics, I kind of hone in on the fact that I think this conference is for the person who just wants to be with a lot of other language nerds who love the biblical languages and want to be encouraged on in that process. And then if that's you, there would be something along that spectrum that would interest you. So.
Yeah. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that one of my colleagues at Biblical Mastery Academy, Dr. Daryl Berlin, is also doing a breakout session there at the conference on Granville Sharp Rule. So he's working on the Greek side, of course. That's his expertise area. So I just wanted to mention that if anyone in the audience is interested in hearing that, I would encourage you to attend his breakout session.
If I want to learn German, I want to go ask a German. If I want to learn French, I would like to go ask a French-speaking person. And so when if I want to learn Hebrew, I want to go ask those people who know Hebrew. And the Masoretes knew their language. They knew what they were doing. They knew how to put signs and symbols in the text that would preserve it for all future generations. I don't know if they had the foresight to know that the language would die and then be revived. I don't know, but what they preserved, I think, is an accurate representation of the syntax, at the least, and maybe some exegetical help too.
I just want to take a moment and thank you once again, Dr. Howell, for you taking the time to speak to these topics. I hope our audience has found them to be very helpful, maybe answer some questions that they've had for a long time. I look forward to joining you at the Hebrew for Life, Greek for Life conference and the refresher course this year. I would encourage anybody, if this has piqued your interest in maybe picking up Hebrew again, because you learned it at one point in time, or you just want to be exposed to some of the things that we've been talking about here, please consider coming to Louisville, Kentucky, joining us for the conference, and maybe even the refresher course if that interests you. So, any final words?
No, I don't think so. I think I would just encourage everybody to keep moving forward. Like it is worth the fight. It is worth the battle to learn the biblical languages, to learn Hebrew. It is worth it. And I find the language to be very rich. I call it thick. It gives a lot of flavor to the way we read the Bible. It doesn't unlock an interpretive key, but it's worth that richness in God's word. So keep moving forward.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, I'll let you go then. And as I usually conclude my classes, I wish everyone shalom, and I'll do that to you as well.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.